Hello everyone and welcome to the Game Engine programming series where I write a game engine from scratch. In the last video we finished working on the dark theme for the level editor's user interface and I'm quite happy with what we ended up making. The colors are nice and we have some interesting animations going on here. And today I would like to continue and create a couple of controls that would allow me to input numeric data. And by that, I mean simply changing numbers for everything that requires numbers in the game, which is a lot of things, of course. And the controls that I'm going to create today should make it easier for us to input those numbers. And what I have in mind for that is something similar to what we have here, for example, in Adobe Premiere, or any other application basically that allows us to change numbers much in the same way. Here we can change numbers by selecting them with a mouse and just dragging. Like here in the position, I can drag over that number and the position will change. Or I can just click once on this number and then I can input a number using keyboard. And that's exactly what I'm going to create today in WPF. Oh, we are running. Okay, sorry. Let's go back to Visual Studio and start working on our new controls. Here in Utilities, I'm going to add a new folder and there I'll create the new controls for numeric input. And the first control that I'm going to write is something similar to TextBlock, but for numbers. And therefore, I'm going to name it NumberBox. That's quite an imaginative name, I know. In this case, I'm going to create a custom control by inheriting from a control. And the first thing I have to do is to override its default style key property, and I can do that in the static constructor. And then I can override its metadata and set it to this type. And what this does is just to override the default style key property, as the name says, and then WPF will know what control should be attached to what style. So if you look at this style for the button, for example, and it says the target type is a button, then WPF will apply this style to some custom control that's a button. And whenever we are creating a custom control, we let WPF know how a style can be applied to this custom control. So because this is a number box, we should be able to set a number. And therefore, I need a dependency property that holds that value. A dependency property is something that we can bind to. For example, here in the text box, this text property is a dependency property that we can bind something to. So here in NumberBox, I'll have a dependency property that's called a value property. And the way we create a dependency property is by registering it and connecting that to a regular property that we have here. So I am going to create a regular property as well that's of type string. And this property uses this value property as its backing field. So we don't have this default getter and setter anymore, but we have to write our own. So this property is our dependency property, and it uses this value property as its backing field, which is registered. Now this control consists of two parts. It's a text block that displays this number. And there is also a text box that is used whenever we want to type in a new value. But a text box is hidden unless we make it visible to edit the number. And then I can tell WPF to expect these parts as well. Okay, and whenever this template is applied, so for example, here in button, we have a template. And at some point, this template will be applied to the control. And whenever that's applied, I can attach some event handlers to this text button to handle mouse actions that we can click on it and drag it. And therefore, I can override a method that is on apply template. And then I can get a template part and then attach the event handlers to it. Now we have 3 event handlers that handle our mouse actions. And the only thing I want to do is to determine when we have clicked the text block and we are dragging it, right? So the first thing is to remember what the original value is of this value property. So I have a private field for that. And because this property is a string, I have to parse it to this double type. And next I'm going to capture the mouse. And then I'll have another field to remember that I captured the mouse. So I need something to determine if the value has been changed while I was dragging. So I can have another Boolean field. I can reset this in mouse left button down because we just started dragging. And I don't want this click event to propagate any further because we are busy tracking what's happening here. So I'll put its e.handled to true. And finally, I need to remember the current mouse position at the time that we clicked. And because we only drag horizontally, I don't want to drag vertically or whatever. I only remember the X position of the mouse. So this eGet position will get the mouse X position with respect to this control. And then when the mouse is moved and we captured the mouse, that means that the left mouse button is still down, I can calculate what the new value will be. For that, I need to calculate the difference between the mouse positions. And if this difference is larger than a certain value, then I consider that mouse has been moved. And that value is a system parameter constant that we can use. And here I can calculate the new value using this difference in mouse position. Here I am basically rounding up the number to 5 decimals after the decimal point. And that's just to prevent to have a really large number of digits that really don't matter anyway. And finally, I set the value change to true. And whenever I release a button, then I have to check if the value has changed. That means that we drag the value. And otherwise, that means that we just clicked that text block and we want to edit it using keyboard, right? Here I check if the value has changed. So if it's not the case, and we have also a template part that's a text box, then we can use it to change the number. And I know this text box is invisible right now, so I make it visible first. And I select everything in that text box. And this is basically all I have to do to have that kind of functionality to drag a number or just enter a new value for it using keyboard. But WPF doesn't know what this should look like right now, so we are going to have to create a style and a template for this custom control. The first thing I need for this is also a new kind of text box that will change its visibility whenever we hit enter or escape. So the one that we have right now stays visible. And I want to create another one that makes itself invisible whenever we are done with it. And that's something similar to what we have here in the Explorer. If I click on this folder name, then there is a text box that becomes visible, and then when I hit enter or hit escape, then it becomes invisible again. And that's for renaming things, of course, and that's why I'm going to name this style the text box with rename. And the only difference here is that we have another event handler for key done and whenever it loses focus. So I'll put these event handlers for the text box next to the others. We already have the text box key down. And this one is just a copy paste of this with the difference that the text box will make itself invisible after it's done. Here, whenever the text box loses focus, then we go back to the old value and then move the focus to the previous control that had the focus before this one, and then make the text box invisible again. Now I can create a style for this number box. I need to create a namespace here for our utilities and controls. This style will be applied to all number boxes in the application. Now I can define here what it should look like. So here is where I can use these parts that we put here. Okay, this is our text block part, and that's what is mainly displaying the number. And whenever we go over the text block with the mouse, then the mouse cursor should change to this horizontal resize cursor to indicate that we can drag the value. And on top of this, I'll have the text box, which is normally invisible. Now, of course, I want this text block to become invisible whenever the text box is visible. Otherwise, we will see the old value underneath the value that we are editing. Therefore, I'm going to have a couple of control template triggers that handle that. And then I'll have another trigger to indicate that we have mixed values. If you remember, we used multi-selection game entities, and we have that for our components as well. But whenever some property has mixed values, these functions get mixed value, for example, will return null. And whenever it's a number that we are dealing with, if that's null, then in this number box, it should indicate that it's mixed values as well. Okay, so whenever the value that we have binded is null, then we tell the user that it is a mixed value. Now I can test this just by putting one of these in here, for example, in the world editor, so I can see it right away. Okay, you can see the value of 0 here, and if I go over this 0 with the mouse and it changes to that double arrow, horizontal double arrow, and then I can drag the value. Okay, and now when I just click once, I can see the text box becoming visible, but it's stretched, so I have to fix that first. But I can enter a new value anyway, so that's good. I'm not sure why I don't have the font color here, because it should be a light font color, the foreground. So let me see. Okay, that fixed it. We of course have to set the foreground color for the number box. Okay, I set the horizontal alignment of the text box here in this style. And that way it doesn't stretch anymore. All right, good. Next, I would like to have some more control over how fast this number is changing, depending on my mouse position. Right now, I don't really have a fine control over it. And what I want to do is to make this go slower if I press Control, and make it go faster when I press Shift on the keyboard while dragging the value. And that way I can change big numbers or release small numbers in a consistent way. So I'm going to introduce a new field, and that's a multiplier. And whenever I click the mouse, I can set that multiplier depending on whether Control or Shift buttons are down. So the default value for this multiplier is 0.01. And here, when I'm moving the mouse, I can look at the keyboard and see if the Shift or Control keys are down, and then change the value for the multiplier to be a bigger value or a smaller value. So here I can multiply this mouse disposition with multiplier. So the smaller the value of multiplier, the slower this number changes, and the higher the value, the bigger the change in the new value. But before that, I'm going to check if the Control or Shift keys are down. So here we go 10 times slower if the Control is down, and 10 times faster if the Shift key is down. So this is the normal change. not using any keyboard keys. And when I hold Control, then the change should be smaller. And when I press Shift, then it goes way faster, as you can see. Okay, there's a problem. If I hold Shift or Control, the multiplier value will change, but whenever I release Shift, then it won't be reset to its default value. So I have to change that first. So here, if there is no Control or Shift key pressed, then the multiplier value is just its default value. And then I don't have to do this here, of course. And I want to enable the user to set their own multiplier as well. So if they want something to go 10 times faster, then they should be able to set it. And therefore, I'm just going to have another dependency property called a multiplier again. But this one is a public multiplier value. And it's just a double value. So now I can also have a multiplier. For example, I can set it to 10, and the change in value will go 10 times faster. Oh, I'm of course not using that value for the multiplier, so that hasn't any effect yet. I forgot. Here I have to multiply with a multiplier. Multiply the multiplier. Yeah, you can see it's now a really big number. It works. Next, I'm going to make a control that allows me to input vector types. And that one is unsurprisingly called a VectorBox. And for this control, I'll have more dependency properties because I'll have an X component, a Y component, a Z component, and a W component. So I can display up to 4 numbers. I can copy paste from NumberBox to not have to type all of these. And then I can try and make the style and template for this control, like we did for NumberBox. Here in this vector box, I'll be using the number box to display the values. I'm basing this style on the default style for number box. So if we have some other style for the number box, it doesn't interfere with this one. In this vector box, I also want to have a multiplier dependency property that I can set. So I'm going to introduce another dependency property, which is exactly the same as we have here for number box. So I can just copy paste it. So because we have multiple components in this vector, so we can have 2, 3, or 4 components, I'm going to use a grid, and I want to be able to give this vector box an orientation, so the components will be in a vertical column or in a horizontal row. And that's why I'm going to have rows and columns in this grid. And then I'll have 4 number boxes here, 1 for each component. On default, this control will display 3 components, unless we tell it to display 4 components. For that, I need another enumeration here to be able to indicate what number of components should be displayed. And then I'll have another dependency property that I can use to set the vector type for this vector box. And then I need to put these number boxes to the relevant column or row of this grid, depending on the orientation. So for the orientation, I also need a dependency property. Here in the template for this control, I'm going again to define control template triggers to make these number boxes fall into the right column or row in the grid. So if we are aligned vertically, then I'll put the number boxes in different rows. And because we are not using the second, third, and fourth column of the grid, they should kind of collapse basically to a 0 width. And I can do that by setting their width to auto. And I can do the same whenever the orientation is horizontal, but then instead of using the rows, I'll use the columns. Next, if we are using different sizes for vectors, then we will have to make the corresponding number box invisible. So if we are displaying a vector 2, then the number box for z and w components should become invisible. This takes care of different kind of vectors. And the last things I want to do is to set a trigger for mouse over and its enabled state of this control. If we hover over this control with a mouse, then the border color will become brighter. And if this control is disabled, then this grid with everything in it will be half transparent, so it will appear darker. And this is everything that we have to do, I think. Now I can just put this also in the world editor and test it. Okay, I made a mistake here in the VectorBox. I should change these to be VectorBox as well instead of NumberBox. Otherwise, it will try to register all these dependency properties for NumberBox again, which is, of course, not something that we want. Okay, as you can see, something is not quite right here. So I'm going to try and find out what it is. Well, of course, I need to spell orientation correctly. Okay, that looks good. Let's try and make this a bit less wide so we can see what we are talking about. These are the vector components that are laid horizontally, and these ones are vertical. And then I can just change these values. Okay, there is a bug. Of course, here they are all binding to the x value. I need them to bind to x, y, z, and w. Like so. And that's what we get. That's better. And of course, I can click on them and just type in any value, and that works. 2, 44, 6, 7, 8. And it appears to be working just nicely. Okay, let's do one more control and we'll be done for today after that. And the one control that I'm going to make now is to display single values. It's just like a number box, but with a border around it. So it's a combination of the vector box and the number box to display a single value. And I'm going to call that one ScalarBox. I think this one is quite easy to make because it's just a copy-paste of some elements of NumberBox and VectorBox. So let's first create the class. And all I have to do now is to inherit from NumberBox. And again, do this default style key property override metadata. And I'm done with the code, and all I have to do now is to define the style for this control. That I can do in control templates. Now I can just copy some of these properties. Now, like I did here in VectorBox style, instead of using a number box here, I'll just copy everything that's in a number box. So I don't have to define another style that's based on the number box style because I'm not going to use it. But I will need these properties to apply to the style for ScalarBox. So I'll just copy them over here. By the way, we don't need border thickness for NumberBox because it doesn't apply to this control. And then I need this part from the VectorBox, the border, of course. And within this border, I'll have the grid from NumberBox. Again, because I'm setting the minimum width for the NumberBox here in VectorBox, I'll have to set that explicitly for the grid because we are basically defining the width of this grid in NumberBox, of course. So here the minimum width will be 50 as well. And then I'll have the same triggers for mouse over and is enabled from VectorBox. Man, this copy pasting is fun, isn't it? And then I need 2 more triggers from NumberBox itself to make the text box visible or collapsed and handle the case when the value is null. So I'll just again copy paste these 2 triggers. And we are done. Now I can go ahead and test it in World Editor. So I can add 1 more control here. Okay, here I need to name the grid, of course. The grid name is grid. So here is our new control for displaying a single value. And it works pretty much the same as NumberBox or VectorBox, but with a single value, of course. And then I can click and change the value. Yeah, that's it. So this was it for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this blue episode. It's the last one for now. And the next time we'll have a green episode again. And that's where I'm going to write a transform view for transform component here to display a multi-selection transform component for our game entities. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you join me on Patreon, you'll get access to the code on GitHub, so you don't have to type everything over from the video. Plus, there are also other nice goodies and rewards exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Please use the link in the video description to check them out. I hope to see you next time. Until then, take care and happy game engineering!